Dylan Wang confesses, "I'm afraid to lose her." The words slipped out of Dylan's mouth in a moment that no one expected, words that fans had been waiting to hear but never thought he would say. It happened during a quiet break in filming, the set already dim with the last of the crew packing away equipment. Dylan was sitting on a chair in the corner, his gaze fixed on the floor, when he finally confessed what had been haunting him all along. His voice was soft, almost fragile, but the weight of his words carried across the room. "I'm afraid to lose her." No one could have guessed the timing, and no one could have prepared for the silence that followed. A few people nearby stopped moving, their hands frozen mid-task. They knew who he meant, even though he never said her name. It was the unspoken truth that had lingered around them for years, weaving itself into every project, every glance, every unfinished conversation. Dylan was not speaking as a rising star or as a performer trained to deliver lines perfectly. He was speaking as someone stripped down to his most human fear. The confession did not end there. He leaned back, covering his face with his hands, and whispered again, "I cannot imagine what happens if she leaves me behind." What followed felt like a storm bottled inside a single room. Crew members exchanged looks, but no one dared to step closer. Some say he was speaking to himself, others swear he knew someone was listening. Because just a few steps away, in the shadow of the doorway, Shen Yue had paused on her way out. She had stopped the moment she heard his voice, her body stiff, her breath shallow, her eyes wide. For minutes she stood there, frozen between staying hidden and walking into the light. And in that liminal moment, something extraordinary happened. Dylan lifted his head, staring at the empty wall in front of him, and continued speaking as though she were right there. He said that every time she pulled away, he felt a piece of himself collapsing. He admitted that he had pretended to be fine in interviews, that he had smiled for cameras and nodded politely when people asked about her, but inside, it was all breaking apart. The air in that room was thick with tension, the kind that makes every sound louder. Shen Yue's heart pounded so heavily she feared it might give her away. She gripped the side of the wall, unable to move. And then Dylan said the words that left her trembling. "If I lose her, I lose the part of myself that still believes in everything." Those who later learned about the confession insist that it was not just an emotional outburst, but a window into years of buried struggle. Dylan had always carried the weight of being the leading man, the one expected to hold everything together. Yet here he was, admitting that his strength was tied not to fame, not to fortune, but to one person whose presence defined his sense of belonging. The moment could have ended there, locked away as a private secret, but fate had other plans. Shen Yue shifted slightly, and the faint sound of her movement caught Dylan's attention. He turned sharply, his eyes landing on her silhouette in the doorway. For a long moment, neither spoke. She was caught, and he knew she had heard every word. Finally, Dylan rose from his chair and walked toward her. The space between them was charged with everything unsaid. His expression was raw, stripped of the confidence that fans so often admired. She looked at him, her lips parting as though to speak, but the words failed. He stopped just short of reaching her, his hands trembling slightly, and whispered, "You were never supposed to hear that." Her response was barely audible. "Then why does it sound like you wanted me to?" The silence that followed was deafening. Dylan's confession had shifted something permanent between them. From that night forward, their interactions on set carried a different energy. Their eyes met more often, lingering with an intensity that no script could demand. When they spoke, there was a weight beneath every line, an unspoken history that colored even the simplest words. But with the confession came new dangers. Rumors spread quickly, twisted and reshaped until no one knew what was real. Paparazzi began circling, searching for proof of the bond that had always been whispered about but never confirmed. Fans dissected every gesture, every look, creating timelines of their moments together. Through it all, Dylan remained quieter than usual, avoiding direct questions, but his silence only made the confession echo louder. Shen Yue, too, avoided the subject, though her calm demeanor in interviews did little to hide the flicker in her eyes whenever his name was mentioned. They had become characters in a story far larger than themselves, trapped in a narrative that the world refused to let go of. And yet, those who were closest to them knew the truth. The confession had not been a scripted moment or a slip of the tongue. It was the deepest fear of a man who had carried it alone for too long. It was the truth of someone who had already given his heart and was terrified of watching it walk away. Late at night, when the cameras were gone and the lights had dimmed, people say Dylan could still be heard repeating the same words under his breath, as if they were both a prayer and a curse. I am afraid to lose her. I am afraid she will never know what she means to me. And so, the confession lives on, not as a headline or a rumor, but as a moment carved into the fragile space between two people who were never meant to let the world see this side of them. Whether Shen Yue accepts the truth or walks away from it remains unknown, but one thing is certain. Dylan Wang's fear has already changed everything, because once a confession like that escapes into the air, it can never be taken back. The room was silent after Dylan's confession, a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. His words echoed long after he had spoken them. I'm afraid to lose her. The crew members who had been nearby exchanged glances, their hands frozen mid-task, their eyes widening as though they had just witnessed something they were never supposed to hear. Shen Yue stood only a few steps away, her face unreadable, her breathing sharp as if she was holding something back. For a long moment, no one dared to move. Dylan's gaze never left her, his eyes filled with a rawness that stripped away every mask he had ever worn in public. It was not the carefully controlled charm of a celebrity, not the polished grace of an actor before a camera. This was something real, fragile, dangerous. Shen Yue finally turned, her voice low, almost trembling. You cannot say things like that here, Dylan. Not now. Not like this. Her words were not cold, but they carried a weight, a warning. Dylan stepped closer, the sound of his shoes echoing against the floor. He did not care who was watching anymore. He had been holding back for too long, and the dam had finally broken. Do you think I care about the timing, Shen Yue? Do you think I care about who hears me? I only care about this. About you. Her eyes widened at his boldness, yet instead of answering, she looked away, as though afraid to let her own heart betray her. Behind them, the director gave a signal for the cameras to stop rolling, but no one dared interrupt. This was no longer just a scene. This was something spilling out from the private corners of their lives, something too powerful to contain. Later that night, whispers spread like wildfire. Some said Shen Yue had left the set in tears, refusing to return until she could gather herself. Others swore they saw Dylan following her into the parking lot, his hands clenched, his shoulders tense. A security guard later revealed that they had stood by her car for nearly 15 minutes, speaking in voices too low to catch, until finally she slipped inside and drove away, leaving him standing in the glow of the streetlight, his head bowed. The next day, the tension was impossible to ignore. Dylan arrived on set earlier than usual, his expression unreadable, his smile forced. Shen Yue arrived late, her makeup artists whispering about how her eyes still looked swollen. During rehearsals, they avoided direct eye contact, yet every time their characters' lines forced them to draw close, the energy between them became unbearable. At one point, Dylan's voice cracked during a simple line, his throat tight, his words heavy with an emotion that had nothing to do with the script. Shen Yue froze, her own line forgotten, her chest rising and falling as if she could not breathe. The director cut the scene, pretending to be frustrated with the delivery, but the truth was clear to everyone on set. These two were no longer acting. They were unraveling. By evening, the storm that had begun with his confession had only grown darker. A leaked message appeared online, supposedly from someone close to the production team. It read only 3 words, but those 3 words were enough to send fans into chaos. He meant it. Speculation flooded every corner of the internet. Did Dylan's confession mean he had been hiding his feelings all along? Was Shen Yue the reason he seemed distant in recent months? Why had she walked out that night without saying a word?